الطيبين الطاهرين. Please recite the salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وعجل فرجهم واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Last night we talked about one of the attributes of the Ahlul Bayt. What we went through last night, and inshallah this is going to be brief, and then we'll move on to the next attribute, was that we said that with the Ahlul Bayt, one of the things that you find in their lifestyle is that they are very firm in the path that they choose. If they choose a path, then they're going to stick to that path. And we went through some of the examples that we have from the Ahlul Bayt. The important point that we mentioned last night was that this firmness did not come at an older age necessarily. This firmness showed itself at very young ages. So we went through the example of Lady Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha. We went through the example of her and the whole story of Shi'ab Abi Talib, the valley that was owned by the relatives of the Prophet, and the role that Fatima al-Zahra played in that situation. We said that in a situation like that, her age was around how much? 6 or 7 years old. And last night I mentioned this, it's pretty difficult to be able to contemplate that a 6 or 7 year old is able to even play a role, let alone the role of being the person that the Prophet can come to be comforted. Okay. So this firmness does not come at the age of 20, 30, 40, 50. No. It manifests itself at a very young age with the Ahlul Bayt. There was a continuation to the discussion of how the Ahlul Bayt were firm in this path. And unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to continue with that. We ran out of time. But I'm going to emphasize this point again. And wherever I go, I emphasize this point as many times as I can. That we said that if we want to reach a point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts bigger tests in front of us, like the Ahlul Bayt, and we're able to be firm when it comes to those tests and those trials, there is only one way. And that way is to watch out with the basic haram and halal in our lives. The reason why I emphasize this is this, that many times when we speak of spirituality, when we speak of coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we speak of becoming a better person, these are very vague discussions to us. We don't even know exactly what we're talking about. So if I want to measure how I've changed from last Muharram and this Muharram, I really can't tell exactly what has changed. Probably I'll sit down and say, last Muharram I cried more for Imam Hussein. For example, that might be something that someone might use to measure themselves. Last Muharram I attended more majalis, or this Muharram I attended more. These are all good and fine. We're not saying this is wrong. But the number one way of measuring your and my spirituality is to look into our lives and see how less haram we are doing. Because this is the first step to any type of spirituality. I don't care what type of spirituality we're talking about. It starts from the haram and the halal. And the ulama have taught us that if you're able to take care of this basic halal and haram, the other steps will be a lot easier than this. So this is the first step, and it's the most difficult step, and it is the most important step in our path when it comes to coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to becoming a true servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now things are very clear for us. If I want to really see how much I have progressed from last year, if I take, for example, a period of 2 months of my life, I can see how many times in those 2 months I have disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once again, by disobeying, I don't mean things that are discouraged to do. No, haram. The red lines. We explained what a red line means last night. Right? We went through the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the Prophet and what He would do to the Prophet if the Prophet were to attribute things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having said those things, right? وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْدَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ لَأَخَذْنَاهُ بِالْيَمِينِ ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ. So we went through that last night. I just want to emphasize that tonight. And I do that, inshallah. I will do that every night if I get a chance to. I always emphasize this point. Because at the end of the day, when we leave the majlis, we can talk for hours here. At the end of the day, when we leave this majlis, what is going to be tangible in my hands that I can start working on is that basic halal and haram that we find in our risalas. So the way to spirituality, the basic halal and haram. Peace be upon salawat. So tonight we're going to talk about another attribute of the Ahlul Bayt. And this is more of an attribute that you find in the Quran. The Quran speaks of this issue. It's a very, very delicate issue. It's a very sensitive issue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken this issue, at the very least I would say, not lightly at all. And this will be clear as we go through the verses of the Quran. This attribute is the attribute of being able to have control over the tongue. Okay. When we speak of observing the basic halal and haram, how many harams do we have, or how many wajibs do we have? We have many, right? My uncle, not my uncle, another one of my relatives, one time he wanted to make a joke, he sent me this text, right? Sent me this text, and the text said, the summary of the risala, right? If it feels good, it's haram. So basically, if you really look into the harams, there are many things that are haram, and there are many things that are wajib, right? Okay, now let me go grab some of the wine that they have here. Doesn't cross your mind, right? Hopefully not. It doesn't cross your mind that let me go do this haram thing that's just way obviously haram. If you pass someone from the opposite gender, for example, and they're dressed in an inappropriate way, right? At least not in the public, shaitan isn't going to come to you and say, let's say you're with a group of friends, shaitan's not going to come to you and say, بفرمایید. He's not going to do that. Why? Because this haram, it's very obvious, it's very clear. Hopefully you're not that type of person that's going to fall for something that obvious. Okay. So what does shaitan do? Shaitan is going to go for those harams that are hidden, right? That's where he can get us. One of the sources of those harams that are hidden is what? The tongue. Let's go through a tradition together so that we understand the danger of this tongue. Please recite a salawat. This is a tradition from the fourth Imam, Imam al-Sajjad, salawatullahi alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So he's saying, Inna lisan ibn Adam yushrifu kulla yawmin ala jawarihih. He says that every day that you wake up, the tongue begins to greet the other parts of your body. So the ears, the eyes, for example. Inna lisan ibn Adam yushrifu kulla yawmin ala jawarihih. He goes to greet them and see how they're doing, basically. What happens? فَيَقُولُ كَيْفَ أَصْبَحْتُمْ? How was your how you wake up, basically? How are you feeling this morning? Okay. How do they respond? فَيَقُولُونَ بِخَيْرٍ إِن تَرَكْتَنَا. We're fine if you leave us alone. If you were to leave us alone, we'd be fine. وَيَقُولُونَ Allah, Allah fina, please be careful for us. وَيُنَاشِدُونَهُ. And they swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that He will have mercy on them. Why? وَيَقُولُونَ إِنَّمَا نُثَابُ وَنُعَاقَبُ بِكَ. We will only be rewarded or punished because of what you do. So our fate has to do with your fate. If you don't mess things up, then we won't have issues. Now obviously, anyone can make a sin with any part of their body. That's not, but this is how they deal with the tongue, because the tongue is far more dangerous than we take it to be dangerous. Okay. One of the sins that one can do with the tongue is the issue of accusing other people of doing a certain act, of doing something that may be haram, of doing something that may be frowned upon. Okay. We're going to go through a story of the Quran. This is a story that most people, we may have heard sometimes of the story itself, but in detail, it's a story that many people haven't heard of or hadn't had the chance to go through in detail. Inshallah, we're going to go through the verses as we'll portray them here as we did last night. So this is, if you guys have, once again, if you have the Quranic applications on your phones, please take out your phones as we'll go through these verses. These are verses from Surah An-Nur, verse number 10, if I am not mistaken. We're going to start, and from there we're going to move on, inshallah. Please recite the salawat. Let's go to the next verse. Okay. So, just a background of the story, and then inshallah we're going to move on with the story and the verses. During the time of the Prophet, first of all, this is a story that has taken place with regards to one of the relatives of the Prophets. So something happens with regards to one of the relatives of the Prophet. That relative of the Prophet is accused of doing a certain act. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala feels the necessity to send down a revelation with regards to this issue of a Muslim being accused. And this is the set of verses that we have. So what has happened? There are different narrations as to how exactly the story played out. Because when you go through the verses, and we'll go through them together, they don't mention exactly who this story is about. We don't know the names. Like I mentioned yesterday, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves the details out. Remember we discussed the number of Ashab al-Kahf last night. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts himself through the trouble to mention 4 or 5 different opinions, and at the end of the day, He doesn't even tell you how many there were. Similarly, in a story like this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not even tell us who the story is about. Who was this person who was being accused? So there's a dispute amongst the Shia school of thought and the Sunni school of thought. Majority of the Sunni school of thought say that this had to do with one of the wives of the Prophet. The Shia school of thought say it had to do with another relative of the Prophet. Okay. Now, regardless of that, what is the general idea of the story? This is the general idea of the story. The caravan of the Prophet is moving between cities. And you know that back in the day, the caravans, they had 3 different parts. So you had the first part, or the first group of people who moved ahead of the caravan. Okay. What was their job? They moved ahead of the caravan to make sure if there are any dangers, anything that they have to make the caravan alert of, right? They're moving ahead, so they can tell what's going to come up. And then you had basically the main body of the caravan. And then you had people who were following the caravan, right? Those people who were following the caravan, what was their responsibility? Their responsibility was that if anyone was left behind, right, that they would bring them with them. Okay, so you have these 3, and this is clear when, for example, in Hadith al-Qadir, right, what the Prophet did, when he stopped, right, we've heard that he told those who have gone ahead and those who are behind him, so that they all gather. So that's how caravans moved back in the days. Okay. The Prophet is moving from one city to another city. They stop at a station. When they stop, this relative of the Prophet leaves the camel. She leaves the camel that she was sitting on to go take care of something. When she comes back, the caravan has moved on. Okay. The caravan has moved on. Which group is coming up? The last group. The last group is coming up. A person by the name of Safwan. He's coming up, he finds this lady. And as his responsibility dictates, he takes this lady with him to the city of the prophets. When Safwan and this lady get to the city of the prophet, they hear that there are rumors, accusations made that these two were alone and something happens between them. And when this happens, all of a sudden Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the next 10 or so verses. So this is the background of the story. Now, bear in mind that this person is the relative of the Prophet. Who exactly it is, we don't know. But it is definitely a relative of the Prophet. Please recite the salawat. So let's start out from here. The rumors are out there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to teach us how we're supposed to deal with a situation like this. An accusation has been made. What am I supposed to do? What is my responsibility? This is extremely important. Why? Because today in our communities, as a community grows, people get less and less of a chance to interact with each other as much as they used to. What happens? Negative thoughts come into our minds about different people. Right? If you're a group of 3 or 4 friends, there might not be so many rumors. There's only 3 or 4 of you. If there's a rumor, you confront that person. Say, is this right? Let's talk about this. No. But when you have a community, what happens? I'm sitting here, I'm thinking bad thoughts about Brother Muhammad Rizvi. Okay. Do I get a chance to sit with him and see his lifestyle in person necessarily? Maybe not. So this is something that we deal with on a daily basis. Another situation where we deal with this is when someone comes to us and asks us about someone else. Oh, do you know this Brother Muhammad Rizvi? I've heard this and this and this about him. Okay. Now when someone comes to me and asks that question, let's say I'm a member of this community, I'm not just going to sit there and say, do you know Muhammad Rizvi? At the end of the day, the guy's looking for an answer, right? How am I supposed to respond to that question? Okay. So this is something that each and every one of us in the center tonight deal with on a daily basis. This is important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not taken this lightly. Not in any way. So the rumors are out there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts like this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ جَاءُوا بِالْإِفْكِ عُصْبَةٌ مِّنْكُمْ. Certainly those of you جَاءُوا بِالْإِفْكِ that brought the ifk. Ifk means accusation. The whole story is known as قِصَّةُ الْإِفْكِ. The story of accusation. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ جَاءُوا بِالْإِفْكِ عُصْبَةٌ مِّنْكُمْ. Surely those of you who brought these rumors, who started these rumors, عُصْبَةٌ مِّنْكُمْ. It's a group of you. Okay. لَا تَحْسَبُوهُ شَرًّا لَكُمْ. Don't think that these rumors that are spreading now, these are bad for you. No. The fact that this has come up, it's good because you will learn a lesson from it. لَا تَحْسَبُوهُ شَرًّا لَكُمْ بَلْ هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It's good because you're going to learn from this. Okay. لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مِّنْهُمْ. From that group that started this ifk, لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مِّنْهُمْ. For each and every one of them, مَكْتَسَبَ مِنَ الْإِثْمِ. Each and every one of them has their own share of their sin. What does that mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, each and every one of them, based on the share that they had in starting this accusation, they will have their punishments. وَالَّذِي تَوَلَّى كِبَرَهُ مِنْهُمْ لَهُ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. And the one who had the greater share, لَهُ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. Notice that from the very get-go, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not even care that a group of people have started this. What is he concerned about? He's concerned about how the general body of Muslims are going to deal with a situation like this. He says, listen, I know that a certain group of people started this. Usbatun minkum. A certain group of people started this. It wasn't like the general body of Muslims got together in this. No, there are troublemakers amongst you. But know that each one of them, they will have their share of punishment. So he's making it very clear that you shouldn't be worrying about that troublemaker. That's why he's a troublemaker. That's why you call him a troublemaker, because he's going to cause fitna like that. Because he's going to cause those rumors like that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the very get-go, He's saying, listen, don't worry about them. What are you going to do about this situation? How are you going to deal with this situation, right? It's like parents, right? Sometimes parents, if there's a fight between the kids, the siblings, right? The kid says, oh, he started it. Another one says, no, he started it, right? And if you're a bad parent, you're going to say, who started it? Let me see who started it. But if you're good parents, hopefully you're not going to say that. You're going to say, okay, I don't care who started it. It's about how you deal with it when it starts. It's not like we don't live in a world where you can always find the person who started the issue. It's not the world that we live in. No, you have to know how to deal with it when someone else starts it. Okay. Let's move on to the next verse. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains how we're supposed to deal with a situation like this. لَوْلَا إِذْ سَمِعْتُمُوهُ ظَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بِأَنفُسِهِمْ خَيْرًا. How come, why is it that when the mu'minun and the mu'minat heard of these accusations, why didn't they ظَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بِأَنفُسِهِمْ خَيْرًا? Why didn't they think better of themselves? Okay. We need to pause here. Notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ظَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنُ. What does dhan mean? In the Quran, dhan has been used for different meanings. But what the verse is referring to in this case, it means that you're pretty sure about something. You're not 100% sure, right? So you have dhan and you have yaqeen. Yaqeen is when you can swear on it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, how come you did not have husn dhan? Notice Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying that when you hear something like that about that individual, that you should quickly say, no, he didn't even do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't even concerned with whether that person did it or didn't do it. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned about is when you hear a story, you hear an accusation, until it's proven to you, you're going to deal with it as if it didn't happen. ظَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بِأَنفُسِهِمْ خَيْرًا وَقَالُوا هَذَا إِفْكٌ مُبِينٌ. How come they didn't dismiss this? Okay. Usually when we mention this, right, the thing that comes to mind is, oh, Maulana, what you're saying, it's too idealistic, right? So if I hear, for example, Brother Muhammad Rizvi, he's done something wrong, and he continues to do that wrong thing. Okay. I know that that's how he does things. Okay. Next time someone comes to me and says this brother has done this, that I say, no, he didn't do it. So what, you're telling us to be naive? That if someone comes and tells us that this is what happened, and it goes against a certain person in the community, that we say, no, this doesn't happen. Well, don't we turn out to be naive like that? This is a very important question. Right? I remember one time I was talking about a certain topic in another community, and after I was done with the talk, this young Iranian couple approached me. A very nice couple, I know them personally. And the mother was asked, she was kind of confused. And so she said that, Maulana, what you said was very nice, and it was really, I really enjoyed the talk, but it sounded kind of Jesus-y. I was like, Jesus-y? And what she meant by that was like, it sounded too idealistic, like, too many morals, like as if we're being naive about things. It's like too Jesus-y, right? Like it's too many morals in that. It's not practical. Sometimes when I talk about this topic, people are thinking, oh, that's too Jesus-y, you know? Okay. Now, is it really that Jesus-y, or is there an explanation here? Oh, there's a very important explanation here. You see, we need to differentiate between, let's say, for example, someone comes to you and says, such and such event took place when you weren't here. Okay. Now, I can do two things when he says such a thing to me. I can say, you're not lying. And practically speaking, I base my life on what he just said. I base my actions on what he just said. For example, they tell me, Allah, when you weren't here, they were saying bad things about you. So I do two things. I say, first of all, you're not lying. Second of all, practically speaking, I'm going to take that to be true. So let's say, for example, I'm not going to come to this community anymore. Okay. This wasn't the approach of the Ahlul Bayt. What is the approach of the Ahlul Bayt? They wouldn't accuse that person of lying, but at the same time, practically speaking, they would take their precautions. So someone would come to the Prophet, O Prophet of Allah, we went, let's say the Prophet of Allah has sent out an expedition, sent out a group of Muslims to take care of it. O Prophet of Allah, when you weren't there, this person did this. The Prophet would say, you're not lying. But practically, did that mean he would take that guy and punish him? No. These are two different issues. To accuse someone of lying is one thing, and then practically basing your life on what that person has said is a different issue. For example, the Prophet wants to leave the city of Medina. This is just an example. It's not a narration or anything. The Prophet wants to leave the city of Medina. There is someone that the Prophet has heard that he's not a reliable individual. Okay. Is the Prophet going to sit there and say, those who came to me and said that he's not a reliable individual, they are liars? He's not going to say that. But does that mean that in practice, he's going to base his actions on what they said? No. He's going to take his precautions. He's going to go, he's going to leave the city. He's going to leave the city with someone like Ali ibn Abi Talib. He's not going to leave the city with someone who's not necessarily reliable. So, accusing someone of lying or basing our actions on what that person is saying are two different things. Please recite the salawat. So let's go back to the verses. لولا إذ سمعتموه ظن المؤمنون والمؤمنات بأنفسهم خيرا وقالوا هذا إفك مبين. If you look into the narrations that have been narrated from the wife of the Prophet with regards to these verses, it said that she took pride in the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down verses to exonerate her from a sin that she was accused of. But pay attention that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going through the verses, never does He even explain whether such a thing happened or didn't happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is even concerned with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, now that you have limited information, how are you supposed to judge the situation? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned about. Not whether it actually happened or it didn't happen. No, He's teaching you and me how we're supposed to deal with the situation. لَوْلَا جَاءُوا عَلَيْهِ بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاءَ. How come when these people made this accusation, لَوْلَا جَاءُوا عَلَيْهِ بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاءَ? How come they didn't bring forth the 4 witnesses that is necessary for a sin like that to be proven? Okay, they didn't bring forth their witnesses. فَأُولَٰئِكَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْكَاذِبُونَ. When they just accuse someone of something and they don't even have evidence for it, they're the liars. They're the liars in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأُولَٰئِكَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, هُمُ الْكَاذِبُونَ, they're the liars. Oh Allah, but maybe something really happened. He says, that's not what I'm concerned with. What I'm concerned with is these individuals, when they're making a judgment, do they have the knowledge? Do they have the evidence with them when they're making that judgment? Or no, they're just throwing things out there. If they're throwing things out there without the evidence, then in my eyes, they're liars. Even though maybe, yes, maybe something might have happened. But they don't have the evidence. They're making accusations without evidence. They're liars in my eyes. Let's move on to the next verse. Let's go another verse. Okay. وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَمَسَّكُمْ فِيمَا أَفَضْتُمْ فِيهِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. If it wasn't for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of what you had done, spreading these rumors, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have punished you. Okay. Once again, going back to this idea, Maulana, this is making us too naive. Let me tell you something. These are principles that the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would employ. Did the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he was spreading his message, was he dealing with 20 people, 30 people? Was he dealing with a small community? No. When the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was spreading his message, and throughout his lifetime, near the end of his lifetime, he was ruling a nation. Sometimes people say, Maulana, these are nice things that you're saying, but practically, if I want to make sure I'm not being naive, if I hear accusations about someone, then I'm going to take them to be true. Otherwise, I'm going to be naive. Practically speaking, when it comes to my relatives and my family and my co-workers, I can't really apply what you say. Allah, the Prophet was ruling a government, and he applied these. Now you're telling me that when it comes to your chachu, your mamu, your khale, amme, dai, you can't apply these principles? That it will make you naive? No. You're telling me then that the Prophet was naive? The Prophet was the furthest thing from being naive. If we think that this is making us naive, we haven't understood the concept correctly yet. And the concept is this: we have to be able to differentiate between accusing someone of being a liar and basing our actions on what someone just says. These two are two different things. Let us go through another verse of the Quran and then we'll continue with these verses. This is has to do, in fact, with this idea of the Prophet being naive. Those who had this misunderstanding during the time of the Prophet, they would accuse the Prophet of being what? Of being naive. If we can go to verse 61 from Surah Tawbah. Please recite salawat. So in verse 61 from Surah Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is explaining one of the names that the Prophet was called. Okay. And it's a very weird name. The first time I read the verse, I had to go over the verse again to make sure that I got the right wording. Okay. The verse says, I think it's the next one. Yes, okay. وَمِنْهُمُ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيِّ. And there are amongst those of the hypocrites within Medina, الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيِّ. Those who bother the Prophet, they annoy the prophets, they mock the prophets. How do they bother and annoy the prophets? وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ. You guys can see the translation. They say that he is a ear. What kind of mocking is that? The Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when people would come and say things to him, he was so accepting of what they had to say. And he would never accuse that person of lying, to the point that people, the hypocrites, accused him of being udhun. Udhun means whatever you hear, you believe. وَمِنْهُمُ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيَّ وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ. He's naive. He doesn't even understand what's going on. Why? Because if someone came to the Prophet and said, I did this and that, he wouldn't say you're lying. He'd accept it from him. Okay. وَمِنْهُمُ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيَّ وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a rebuttal basically on what they're saying. وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ قُلْ أُذُنُ خَيْرٍ لَكُمْ. The fact that the Prophet will accept whatever you will come and tell him is good for yourself. Not that he will accept it in the sense that he will believe in it. No, he won't accuse you of lying. This is good for you. Why? Because when you hypocrites come to the prophets and you say things that are not true, he doesn't outwardly expose you. This is good. This is for your own benefit. This is in your own interest. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adds a very important phrase. He explains, what does this mean, أُذُنُ خَيْرٍ لَكُمْ? يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَيُؤْمِنُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Sometimes when you really pay attention to the details of the verses of the Quran, that's when it really hits you. That this is really a book that cannot be written by a human being. This is when you understand it. Yes, if you just pick up the Quran, right, and you don't focus, you don't go into details with the Quran, a lot of times you might feel like, I could have probably said like some of that. Like I could pick up some of that. But if you go deeper into these verses in a detailed manner, then you know someone has masterminded these verses. If we had a chance to go through surah, the verse of Tabligh, Ya ayyuha rasul balligh ma unzila ilayk wa in lam taf'al fama ballaghta risala. That's a very nice discussion. Because when you go through that verse and people come up with different questions, right? For example, Fakhr Razi, a very well-known Sunni scholar, he comes up with just about, I think, 8 or 9 issues with that verse to prove that that verse doesn't have to do with the issue of wilayah. And then you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put signs and clues here and there, so that as much as you want to deviate from the issue of wilayah, it will bring you back. And all in one sentence, then you know there is a mastermind behind this verse. You know that there is no human being that can do this. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is continuing with his rebuttal. يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَيُؤْمِنُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Yu'minu billah, he's saying that the Prophet, he believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? That means that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something, the Prophet believes it. If he says, this person died, he believes it. In the sense that even in his actions, he's going to base his actions on what? On that statement. Okay. وَيُؤْمِنُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. What changed here? The ba turned into a la. Okay. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala change the ba into a lam? Because what yu'minu bishay'in means he believes in it. Yu'minu lishay'in means you believe for the sake of it. Yu'minu billah, he believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa yu'minu lil mu'minin, and he believes in what you say for your own sake. He doesn't believe in it in the sense that he takes what you have to say. If someone comes, some hypocrite comes and says stuff to the Prophet, Prophet's not that naive, just take whatever people come and tell him. No, he's not going to base his actions on what that person says. But he's not going to go out and accuse that person either. يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَيُؤْمِنُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ. Now let's go back to the verses that we were discussing from Surah An-Nur. Please recite the salawat. ولولا فضل الله عليكم ورحمته لمسكم فيما أفضتم فيه عذاب عظيم. If it wasn't for the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of what you had done, there would have been a severe punishment. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains a little bit more in detail what these individuals had done, how they had contributed to the spreading of this message. This gets a bit detailed, so I need your attention. The verse says, إِذْ تَلَقَّوْنَهُ بِأَلْسِنَتِكُمْ. Do we have that verse? Okay. إِذْ تَلَقَّوْنَهُ بِأَلْسِنَتِكُمْ. When you receive that message with what? Al-lisan, with your tongues. وَتَقُولُونَ بِأَفْوَاهِكُمْ. And you say things with your mouths, مَا لَيْسَ لَكُمْ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Things that you're not sure of. إِذْ تَلَقَّوْنَهُ بِأَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَتَقُولُونَ بِأَفْوَاهِكُمْ مَا لَيْسَ لَكُمْ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Just the fact that you play the role of a medium, you receive that message and you pass it on. Sometimes the person that you are talking about, you don't even know that person. Sometimes you don't even have a bad intention. They will tell me, Brother Muhammad is like this or like that. I don't even know Brother Muhammad. I'm new to the community. I don't even know Brother Muhammad. But if I sit with someone else and say, yeah, apparently there's this Brother Muhammad. He seems to be very ignorant or arrogant or whatever. Do I know Brother Muhammad? No. Do I have, as they say, do I have beef with Brother Muhammad? No. I don't even know Brother Muhammad. I am just receiving a message and passing it on. This is important. A lot of times, what happens when it comes to spreading a certain message, we may not even know the person. We may not even have a bad intention, right? Sometimes, people have just heard things. They're curious, right? As the saying goes, curiosity kills the cat. Just because you've heard something doesn't mean you can go on and tell it to other people. إِذْ تَلَقَّوْنَهُ بِأَلْسِنَتِكُمْ. You receive it. تَلَقِّي. وَتَقُولُونَ بِأَفْوَاهِكُمْ مَا لَيْسَ لَكُمْ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. And you say things. I've heard that he has issues with his wife. Do you know him? Do you know his family? It doesn't matter. Why? Because I'm playing the role of that medium. I'm passing on the message. إِذْ تَلَقَّوْنَهُ بِأَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَتَقُولُونَ بِأَفْوَاهِكُمْ مَا لَيْسَ لَكُمْ بِهِ عِلْمٍ وَتَحْسَبُونَهُ هَيِّنًا. And you think and assume that this is a light thing that you have done. Why? Because you're just saying a couple words here and there. This is how shaitan gets to us. Because this sin is a hidden sin. Because it's simple. I'm not killing anyone. I'm not stealing. I'm not murdering anyone. I'm just saying a couple words here and there. وَتَحْسَبُونَهُ هَيِّنًا وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمٌ. But in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what those words, those 4 or 5 words that you say, those 4 or 5 sentences that you say, هُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمٌ. It's no joke in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You may be ruining a life with those words that you say. I'm sure we've all heard stories or may have even experienced this, that sometimes just because certain individuals who are further away from a certain situation continue to say things about that situation, they ruin families. وَتَحْسَبُونَهُ هَيِّنًا وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not take this lightly. يَعِذُكُمُ اللَّهُ أَن تَعُودُوا لِمِثْلِهِ أَبَدًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning you to ever go back to doing something like this. يَعِذُكُمُ اللَّهُ أَن تَعُودُوا لِمِثْلِهِ أَبَدًا إِن كُنْتُمْ مُؤْمِنِينَ. Okay. So as you see throughout the whole story, once again I emphasize, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never said whether something happened or something didn't happen. Once again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking us through the whole story and not telling us what actually happened in that situation. No, He's saying because you have limited knowledge of the situation, then you can't judge this individual. And as far and as long as that person is a Muslim, then you don't have the right, even if there's a chance that he's done it, you don't have the right that say, no, he did that. You know when this comes up a lot? Sometimes within our communities, we have individuals who are known for certain things. They're known for that. Everyone knows it. For example, this person is just open about this issue. Okay. Later on, if something else comes up, anything similar to what that person does, then who is everyone going to point at? Point at that person. Okay. Can I sit here and say that this person, because he's been doing it for 20 years, that for the 21st year he did it again? No. I don't have that right. Because if that happens, then how is people supposed to change their lives? How is someone supposed to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If someone has been doing something for a while, it might be 20 years, it might be 5 years, it might be 6 months. If you're going to accuse that person continuously because he's done it before, so he must have done it again. No, you don't have the right to say that. Does that mean that I have to trust that person 100%? No. Practically, you don't have to trust that person 100%. If I know Brother Mahdi, he's known to steal, God forbid. Okay? God forbid. Okay. Now, someone has stolen something from the center. Very nice, beautiful iPhone, gone. Okay? It kind of reminded me of a situation where, growing up, we would go to some of the centers. I'm not going to mention any names. And then all of a sudden, like when the nights that it gets really crowded, all of a sudden, like half the guys come out and their shoes aren't there. As if on the nights that are very crowded. Oh, where are the shoes? Some of the younger kids, they're so excited about their shoes aren't there anymore. Oh, someone has stolen something from the center. Muhammad has done this before. Can I now go to him and point and say, we know who did it? No. He might have been doing it for 20 years. Maybe this time he didn't do it. Okay. Does that mean now that if I'm going to leave my house, I'm going to trust Brother Muhammad Rizvi? No, not in a million years. I don't have to necessarily trust this brother. No. Practically speaking, I might give my keys to Brother Wajahat, for example. But that's a practical issue. It doesn't have to do anything with me saying that, no, he stole this time as well. These are two different issues. They're two separate issues. Allah, someone comes to marry my child. I go, obviously, the parents, probably more in Eastern countries, but they do a little bit of research to find out what type of person this person is, if they don't know them from before. Allah, they say that he's this type of person, or they say that she is this type of a person. 4, 5, 6 people tell me that. Do I have the right to say, yes, she is that type of a person? He is that type of a person? No, I don't have that right. Does that mean that I have to encourage my son or my daughter to marry that person? No. Practical issues, different from attributing something to a certain individual. So we need to be able to differentiate these two from each other. Please recite salawat. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and inshallah we're going to end with this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala moves, I think it's 2 or 3 verses after that verse. Yes, this one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala touches on a very important issue. says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ. Now this is, let me give you a background of what the verse is talking about. Allah, up until now you were saying that you're not sure, you don't know the evidence. He's done this before, but you're not sure in this particular situation. Allah, you know what? Guess what? I'm sure. So you're sure? I'm sure. Even though we throw that word around very easily nowadays. You're sure? I'm sure. Okay, you're sure? Okay. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it a step further. You're sure? You still can't go around and tell people. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُحِبُّونَ أَن تَشِيعَ الْفَاحِشَةُ فِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Certainly those who like for a certain fahisha means any wrong act in the Quran. Any wronged act. To have shuyur, to spread amongst the believers. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُحِبُّونَ أَن تَشِيعَ الْفَاحِشَةُ فِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. I know he did this. Do I have the right to go around and now tell people that he did this? No. Of course, there are exceptions. If the greater good of a certain person or the greater good of the community lies definitely in this, then we're making an exception of that. But please, let's ask ourselves, how many of the times that we speak of someone doing something, are we really thinking about the greater good of the community? Right? If you do the statistics, probably 95% of the time the community isn't even the issue. 95% of the time the greater good of the community, of any person is not the issue. We're just used to saying stuff. That's why Imam Khomeini, when he was young, he had a group of his friends. He made a group. Why is he making a group? Because he set certain conditions for the group. It has I think 3 or 4 different conditions. One of them was wherever we are, if we're traveling, whatever we're doing, we're enjoying ourselves. If it's time for a prayer, we're going to pray there and then. So we're not going to delay our prayer. Okay, that was one of the conditions. Another very important condition that he had was this, that when it comes to people who are not in the gathering, we're not going to talk about them. We're not going to talk about someone who is ghaib, someone who is absent. This is different from doing ghaibah. Just because I speak of someone who's absent doesn't mean I'm necessarily doing ghaibah, right? No. Why does he set the condition in this way? Because when you speak of someone who's not here, little by little you talk of them, then you talk about their life, then you talk about the concerns that they have, the ambitions that they have, then you move on to the issues that they have. From there, you move on to the flaws that either that person has or the people around that person has. Either that person has some issues or his family has some issues. His spouse has some issues. His children have some issues. So Imam Khomeini, his wife used to say that when we sat in the house and we were talking, if we were to talk about someone else who wasn't present and we weren't necessarily doing ghaibah, you know what he'd say? You say, oh, talk about yourself. There's a lot of things going on with yourself. Talk about yourself. You have a lot of affairs to talk about. I mean, women know this a lot better than we do. There's a lot of affairs that we can talk about. Maybe for men, it doesn't really make sense to us so much. But for women, it's a lot to talk about. Okay, talk about your own affairs. Why? Because it's natural that if you're talking about the affairs of someone else, you're going to go into the issues that they have. You're going to go into their flaws naturally. Okay. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُحِبُّونَ أَن تَشِيعَ الْفَاحِشَةُ فِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Those who want a certain act to spread amongst people, لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. Why? Because when you go around and say that this person has done a certain act, what happens? The act loses its qubh. The act is not so bad anymore. Why? Because if I come across that act now, say, oh, Brother Muhammad has done this before. Next person, oh, Brother Muhammad and Brother Mahdi have done this before. Little by little, you're normalizing this sin. Even though you're sure that that person did it, don't just go around and tell people. You don't just expose people like that. Why? Because this itself will lead to other sins. Right? If you guys remember, this was a couple years back. I think it was 2 years ago. I was just flying in the airport. I was waiting. And I was sitting there watching the news. And it had been a while since I had come to the States. I was in Iran for quite a while. And I was watching the news. Every 5 minutes, they go back to this person called Petrus. Petrus, I don't remember his name exactly. He was a commander from NATO. Petrus? Petrus? It depends on what ethnicity you come from. So, I'm sitting there, I was like, okay, so they're talking about this guy, and they're talking about what he did. And then 5 minutes later, they're explaining some other news, and they come back. Are there some new secrets that we know about this situation? Delving into it again, okay. And then that goes, and then some other news, and then they go back to it again. Oh, this is normalized so much in the media that now if you hear, God forbid, this person has done it, you're like, oh, it's normal. Now in the country that we live in, it's normalized to the point that it's laughable. It's laughable. That if someone, God forbid, is in a haram relationship with someone else, and because of that ruins the life of a family, it's laughable to us. So we have comedies about it. In the comedy, you see this person is with this person. After a while, he goes, the things change, families are ruined, and we find it funny. Why? Because the normalizing has gone on for so long that such a qabih act, it's qabih in itself, it's even more qabih when it ruins families. It becomes laughable to us. Why? Because when people do it, they expose it. They're open about it. Yes, this happened, that happened, don't judge me. Okay. So the verse is saying, even if you are sure, you can swear, and this rarely happens, by the way. Even if you are 100% sure that this definitely happened, you still can't just go around and talk about it all the time. Except for that exception that I mentioned. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان ومن يتبع خطوات الشيطان فإنه يأمر بالفحشاء والمنكر. O you who believe, when it comes to shaitan, don't follow, not shaitan, the footsteps of shaitan. Because shaitan, when he comes to you and me, he doesn't tell you to just jump into haram. Right? There are footsteps. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. The footsteps of shaitan. Why? فَإِنَّهُ يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ. Because he's going to pull you in that direction. That's where you're going to end up. Right now, you're talking about that person. He's absent. He's not there. You're talking about that person. You're not necessarily talking about their flaws. But this is khutuwatu shaitan. It's going to lead to that. There are certain situations where we're very prone to doing certain things. This is what we call khutuwatu shaitan. You can see the footsteps of shaitan. He's been here. That's where we need to stop. So, with that, we're going to end, inshallah. If we're going to take one point away from the whole story, it's this. And I hope that this has become clear now. But I'm going to emphasize on it just to make sure that we have something tangible when we walk away tonight, inshallah. And that is this. That if I hear certain things about a certain individual, I can't necessarily say they're true. I don't have that right. But in practice, I can take my precautions. So you're not accusing that person, and at the same time, you're not being naive. These are the principles that the Prophet used to teach the Muslims. And so inshallah, we can also be followers of the Prophet in this regard. Please recite a salawat. Sallallahu alayki ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayki ya Zainab. Ya al-Masa'ib. These nights, the family and the caravan of the Ahlul Bayt, they are moving from the city of Karbala towards the city of Kufa and the city of Sham. And up until this point, the caravan has been in the hands of Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein is the person who is responsible for the caravan. Now the 10th of Muharram has passed. This burden is on the shoulders of Ammatuna Zainab, salamullahi alayha. Lady Zainab, from this point on, it's Lady Zainab that has to deal with the issues. She is the one who has to be the patient one for the children. Now, Lady Zainab is dealing with a lot of her own sorrows. A narration says that on the day of Ashura, after the caravan, they had pushed the caravan to move towards Kufa, what the troops did is they had the family of the Prophet pass by the bodies of the shuhada. The bodies of the shuhada have not been buried yet. This individual, Qurrat ibn Qais, he says, I will never forget the cry of one woman amongst the women. There was one woman who was crying loud, and she was calling out, Ya Muhammadah, Ya Muhammadah, O grandfather of ours, do you see what is happening here? He says, I looked closer, I saw that this is Zainab bint Amir al-Mu'mineen. She's calling out, Hada Husaynun murammalun bid-dima. This is your Hussein on the ground, just lying there. Murammalun bid-dima. He's struggling and he's covered in his own blood. Lady Zainab has many sorrows, but the sorrows that truly cut the hearts of Lady Zainab is the pain of the children. And this is something that truly brings tears to your eyes. When you look at the events of Karbala, the incident of Karbala, what happened to these children is what truly creates pain and agony for Lady Zainab. On the day of Ashura, after the horse of Imam al-Hussein returns to the tents, and Lady Zainab knows very quickly that from this point on, it's going to be very difficult. The troops of Ibn Ziyad, they yell out that you have to set fire to the tents of the family of the Ahlul Bayt. They start to set fire to these tents. These children are running around. They're running to take refuge somewhere. Lady Zainab is running between the tents, trying to direct these kids towards herself. They say that some of the kids, they ran towards the deserts. Some of the kids, their clothing had caught on fire. Some of the kids were begging for help. Lady Zainab, in the middle of this, she doesn't even know what to do. This feeling of iftirar, this feeling of ihtiyar, not knowing which way to go is what is creating the pain and agony for Lady Zainab. This is something that Abu al-Fadl Abbas also experienced. They say that when Abu al-Fadl Abbas went to bring water for the children, there was a point where he was coming back towards the tents. And they were aiming at him. And he was fine with that. Abu al-Fadl Abbas is going so that the hope of the children does not die out. And when the mashk, the water of Abu al-Fadl Abbas is struck, the narration says, فَاحْتَارَ الْأَبَّاسِ. Abbas doesn't even know. Is he supposed to go back? Is he not supposed to go back at this point? Do I go back without the water? Or do I not go back? Lady Zainab is gathering these kids. These are the pains of Lady Zainab. There is one more scene that Lady Zainab, I really don't know how she went through something like that. They say that when the family of the Ahlul Bayt reached the city of Sham, and they met with Yazid, and they were there in the courtyard of Yazid, at the night, because they wanted to disrespect the children and the women, they sent them to the ruins. Lady Zainab is there. Imagine Lady Zainab in the dark, in the ruins, with the cold weather at night and the hot weather during the day. She's trying to calm these children. The narration says that the elder ones in the caravan, they didn't tell the younger ones what happened to their fathers. They said, he's gone to a trip, he'll come back, don't worry about it. Lady Zainab is putting these children to sleep from this corner to that corner. And they say that in the middle of the night, all of a sudden this daughter of Imam al-Hussein, she starts to cry out in the middle of the night. Lady Zainab is muttarib. She gets up. Who is this that's crying in the middle of the night? It's the daughter of Imam al-Hussein. What does she want? She wants her baba. She's asking for her baba. Lady Zainab doesn't even have an answer to give to this daughter of Imam al-Hussein. Where's my father? Where has he gone? What is Lady Zainab going to say at that moment? Lady Zainab tries to put the child back to sleep. She continues to try. The baby is not going back to sleep. She's continuously asking for her father. She continues to cry. The troops can't take it anymore. They tell Yazid, la'natullahi alayh, oh Yazid, this child keeps crying. What are we supposed to do about this situation? Yazid says, take the head of her father and give it to her. And they say that they brought the head of Imam al-Hussein. The troops brought this head in front of this child at such a young age. And the child, innocent, is asking, what is this that you have brought to me? And the troop says, take this. This is the head of your father. Lady Zainab is witnessing this. Only Allah knows what she went through. They say the daughter took the head of Imam al-Hussein, hugged the head, started crying, and soon enough, they couldn't hear the cry of the daughter anymore. Ammatuna Fatima comes to see the child. The child has given her life away. This is the pain and agony of Lady Zainab. When she's heading back towards Karbala, and when she's heading back towards the city of Medina, there are poems that Lady Zainab recites. O city of the Prophet, do not welcome us. For we have left a number of our people in the city of Sham. One of them is the daughter of Imam al-Hussein. Another moment that set fire to the heart of Lady Zainab is when, after all of the companions had given their lives for Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hussein is left himself with the women, and yes, there is one more soldier left. There's one more soldier left. He goes to the tents, Ya Zainab, give me Ali Asghar. Imagine the worry of Lady Zainab. Where are you taking this baby? Hussein is walking towards the battlefield. He holds up this baby. The troops are confused now. They don't know what to do. Are we supposed to take the life of a baby? They're standing around. They don't know what to do. But there is one troop who knows exactly what he is supposed to do. There's one person who's moving around, struggling to take care of a certain task. As Hussein is holding this child in his hands, Shimr points to Harmala. Harmala, hurry up. Take care of him. This child is struck in the hands of Abu Abdullah. This is unbelievable. This is something that we cannot even imagine the pain of. A 3-month-old, a 6-month-old in your hands, in front of you, being struck. Ilahi ridan biridak. Oh Allah, I can only take this because you're watching. If you weren't watching, I could not be able to take something like this. Hussein is standing there with this baby in his hands. The blood is coming down onto his hands. This is the blood of my Ali Asghar, my innocent child. Now he has to turn back to the tents. Now he has to put this small body with the other bodies of the martyrs of the day of Ashura. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us to be amongst the true followers of Imam Sahib al-Zaman. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees and liberates all of those who are in pain and agony around the world, inshallah.